Well, welcome everyone to our Aging and Spirituality podcast. I'm Chris Jensen.
I'm Kathy Lee Taylor.
And as you can see, if you're watching us, we have a very special guest with us today that we're going to be interviewing. It is Professor Emeritus Stan Goldberg. He's written hundreds of articles, published 9 books, which is very impressive. Excuse me. He's published in learning problems, communication disorders, loss, change, and end-of-life issues. But his upcoming book is what is so relevant to all of you guys, and that is Preventing Senior Moments, How to Stay Alert into Your 90s and Beyond. So we're all very interested in this. And his book opens a window into how we process information and, most importantly, strategies that anyone can use to help prevent senior moments, ranging from forgetting appointments to becoming disoriented. So, Stan, on a previous podcast, we, as most of our folks know, and we mentioned to you, we've done yoga for a long time. And a lot of people think that senior moments are inevitable. And in yoga, we talk about something called mental equivalence, which means that what you think and you feel about a lot, you tend to create. So if you think and expect to have senior moments, then we would say you probably will. So we would love for you to talk a little bit about what you say are the biggest myths of the popular belief that senior moments are inevitable and an unchanging part of aging.
I'll just give you a very quick background on how I came up with these myths. I was driving with a good friend of mine in North Carolina. This was many years ago, and you had, I think it was Halley's Comet was circling the Earth, and you'd be able to see it for many days. So we're driving, and I said, Rich, how far is Halley's Comet? And he said, I'm going to make up a number, 8,248 miles. I went, is that? And I said to him, is that from here or your house? He looked at me like, has he crazy?
He's nuts. He's losing it.
And I realized that maybe I had, because it didn't make any sense. And I thought, well, why did I say that? What did I do that? And that became one of the first things that got me interested in looking at what people call senior moments. And when I went through the literature, I was absolutely amazed that 99% of everything that's written about senior moments implies that they're funny. And for me, I wasn't too happy with my response of from here or your house. So senior moments can be funny to other people, but not necessarily to you. But worse than that, if you look at it as being laughable, you miss an incredible opportunity for finding out what is going on in your brain and whether or not, this faux pas you just made can be a predictor of your future. So the first myth is that that senior moments are funny. I don't think they are. Another myth has to do with when they occur. We call them senior moments. So for me, the implication is it starts when you're 60 or you get your ARP card. But that's not true. There is no starting line on when a senior moment can occur. So that was the second myth. The third is people talk about senior moments as being just memory glitches. Well, memory does play a part in it, but it's far more complicated than that. Yeah. A fourth myth is that senior moments are an inevitable part of aging, but that's not true. My mother, who lived into her 90s, never had a senior moment. Now, she had other things that made my life difficult, but I would never call it a senior moment. So it's not an inevitable part of aging. There's also, when we talk about senior moments, the word moment means it starts here and it ends here. Senior moments are not, isolated individual events. there are always things that precede it, things that generate the senior moment. And if you can identify what those are, you have a good chance of getting rid of that senior moment. And then the final myth is that senior moment, that all you need to do to get rid of a senior moment is be motivated to change. Well, nonsense. Motivation is wonderful. It's not sufficient for change. And I found this all through my practice in communication disorders. So those are the myths. Those are the things that we want to sort of toss to the side and say, okay, we're done with that. Now, how do we understand what's going on?
Wow, I love that. So, listener, just so you know, when Chris and I are doing these kinds of interviews, we kind of bounce back and forth between the questions. So this is me coming in with a question now, because I love what you just said, because I did kind of review your book yesterday. I couldn't read it all. I can't wait to read it all. But from what I read, I picked out these spots where I was like, oh, right, that applies to what I've experienced. No question about it. And really what it made me feel and realize was that we go into older age thinking it's inevitable that we're going to have problems. And it causes so much fear. People really are fearful of that part of life because they think they're going to lose their memory. They're, not going to be able to process data and so forth. So just reading as much as I did about your book, I had this kind of hope, if I understand how my brain works, it doesn't have to feel like that at all. So that was cool. So one of the first things that really jumped out at me was this part in your book where you talked about the psychological issues. And you said, how we process data has a lot to do with our needs, our values, experiences, and how experiences, how they message the information. So you were telling a story about watching Field of Dreams, which really jumped out at me because it's another Kevin Costner movie, but I love the other one that he does, the baseball story. Love of the game. Now I can watch that dang movie. I'm a person that does not even do twofers on movie, but I can watch that movie over and over and over and over again, and it feels like I'm watching a new movie every time. I cannot explain it to you why that is, except that it touches something deep in me about my childhood and my father, who was a sports coach, and la la la. So
connected with you.
It's connected with me. So I want you to talk about that. What does that have to do with how we process data, those psychological impacts, and how does that have anything to do with these senior moments?
Okay, there was a great Japanese movie by Sesshowa Ayakawa. I know I'm butchering his name. Where you had 4 people observed the death or the murder of a samurai, and so they all went in front of a judge, and they each were telling a story. Now they all were right there when he was killed, yet all 4 had totally different versions. And that what he was trying to imply is that there is no thing such as an independent reality where we all see the same thing. And why was that? Essentially because we view the world through filters.
Right.
Now, I'm sitting here right now. I'm furious at Facebook because I had a problem getting online, and that's going to stay with me for a while. It's agitating me more now than I need to.
Okay.
I did that. But everything we do, when we lay down a memory, we're laying that memory down through various types of filters. It could be, psychological. It could just be physiological. We're not feeling well that day. But think about something that you observe with another person, and you go to retell the story. Your friend retells it, and you're there, and you're listening, and you're thinking, what is she talking about? I was there. That didn't happen. In her mind, what she saw is just as relevant as what you did.
Yeah.
So if we think about senior moments, when we're laying down memories, we're laying them through many filters. The older we are, probably the more filters we have. And that in part explains why you have different kinds of senior moments, why I might have one and you might not.
Mhm.
And it also gives you two important bits of information. One, it tells you a little bit about how the brain may be working. And I say may be working because most of what we know about the brain is through conjecture or indirect evidence.
Right.
But it also gives you some ideas on what you can do to prevent that type of senior moment from occurring.
That's so, I love that answer so much. And what most importantly, that listeners, if you heard what he said about there is not one reality, you never have to feel bad about yourself. You just, you are who you are. You never have to think, or compare yourself to somebody else. That's beautiful. Perfect. I love it.
In yoga, we have a practice we call being now, where we work on trying to have our attention in the present moment, because always we're thinking about the past or the future. And that's part of exactly what you were talking about, why, four people will see something and they'll see it differently because each of our background, our subconscious is there coloring it, So that's very interesting. And this practice we do in yoga is to try and help us be more present in the moment. It's not saying, we're going to be right or wrong. We're just going to be more present.
I read that in one of the podcasts, and I thought it's a direct relevance to one of the strategies that I teach clients to use to avoid senior moments. And that is one of the things that I found a lot is that quite often a senior moment develops partially because our minds are just so cluttered. We have so many stories that we're telling ourselves, so we're dealing with different things that it comes out. Yeah, that's a senior moment, but in fact, it's just a matter of being too cluttered. And meditation has been shown, both empirically and just by experience, that it clears out a lot of that. I attended a workshop many years ago where it was being run by a Swiss Buddhist monk. And there was someone there who was trying to make points, I think, with him. And he went to this elaborate discussion about what is the best form of meditation and the best form of yoga practice. And what this young monk said was, listen, it's all a psychological game. It doesn't make a difference, what practice you have or the style of yoga you're using. The purpose of all of that is to clear the mind. So yeah, there's a lot of connections, I think, between what you're trying to accomplish in yoga and what meditation is trying to accomplish, and what someone like me who does a little bit of both is doing with their clients.
That's great. Chris, as she often does, read my mind. That was my next question. I was into the mindfulness and meditation thing because I really wanted to hear if you'd actually studied with people, people that meditate, and do they struggle with the same kind of feelings, the same kind of, I'm having senior moments. I don't know. If you're in the present moment, what do you care? You're not thinking. I didn't remember. You know what I mean?
Like, I do. I've had a love-hate relationship with yoga. I'm going to be honest with you. I can get into that later. But but meditation is something that I've been doing since I was in college. So I'm 78 now. So this is a long time. And a lot of times I would do a little bit of it. I would listen to the Hare Krishna folks at the airport trying to convert me. And I became a serious meditator when I became a volunteer at the Zen Hospice Project.
Wow.
And what we were doing there was, you were dealing with some of the most incredibly sensitive, important issues in people's lives. And, before we went in, at the bedside, we would have a meditative session. So, that was my introduction to having a consistent practice. And yeah, I still meditate. I don't only do it though through sitting meditation. I do it sometimes when I'm washing the dishes, or when I'm working on a piece of artwork. The idea is, going back to the Swiss monk, clear the garbage out. You do it any way you can.
Right.
Yeah.
So you said that was one of the strategies. What other strategies can you share that might help folks?
Okay. Yeah, there's I have 8 of them, and obviously we're not going to have time to go through all of them, but there's a couple that are just
the main ones.
important. One of the biggest, one of the easiest things to do is to slow down. If you think about what may be going on in the brain, is that it doesn't work as efficiently, maybe now when I'm 78, as it did when I was 50 or 40. It doesn't mean that I'm getting demented or I'm on my way to Alzheimer's. But what it says is your brain, well, a better analogy, I guess, is looking at 2 cars trying to go from Los Angeles to San Francisco. One is a Tesla, and the other is a 1964 Plymouth convertible. They'll both make it to San Francisco.
Right.
But the Tesla will maybe just have to go to the bathroom. The guy who owns the 64 Plymouth, and actually that was me, will have to stop, add water, add oil to it. So we're accomplishing the same thing, but doing it a little differently. And what I found, I started looking at the effects of slowing down 30 years ago, when I was working with clients who were stutterers. And the whole, if I could get them to slow down, they were completely fluent. Now, the reasoning behind that is that somehow the brain was not syncing to what you were asking it to do. So think about 2 gears, and if they're off just slightly, they sort of clog each other. So how do you fix that? You slow it down. I found that when I'm working with people, with certain kinds of senior moments, if I can just get them to do it slower, whether that is telling a story, so they don't conflate memories, or doing something around the house, or trying to remember where their keys are. If I can slow them down, that's going to be a tremendous improvement. Now, the question is, okay, so you got them to slow it down. What happens next? Well, that's the back end of it, which is practice. You can get rid of behaviors a lot of different ways. The question then becomes, if I'm going to learn a new behavior, how am I going to make sure it's going to stay there? Well, we know that what happens in the brain is with memories. You can remember how to do something. Like, let's say I'm trying to play the piano, and I can go through a piece, and let's say I'm practicing, and I eventually get it perfectly, and I don't play for a month. Well, when I go back to play that, I'm not going to do that as well. If I go 2 months without playing, it's going to get worse in 3 months. What we think is happening is that when you lay down a memory, that unless that memory is reinforced through practice, you start losing it. So that's the second important thing. Is the first thing is just slow down, and you're going to eliminate a lot of problems. But once you do that, whatever behavior you're doing, you got to practice it consistently.
You also say in your book about that subject, you guys got into my next question again. You advising them to listen and read. How does that apply to what you're talking about?
Well, when there's different types of senior moments, some can be related to reading. I'll give you a very good example. I was working with a client who had a stroke, and one of her biggest difficulties was in reading. So she would go to her book club. Everyone was supposed to have read the whatever they had signed, and she would give her rendition of it, and people would look at each other and go like, where did she get that? Okay, well, what I asked her was, what were you doing? Show me how you read. and she was reading the way we normally read. You sit there and you just go, line by line, and you turn to the next page and you go on. Well, that was sufficient enough to produce for her senior moments of being, not laughed at, but being questioned in the book club.
Yeah.
And so there's a number of different strategies that we could use for reading that would that would enable her to take the information that was coming into her, lay it as a memory, reinforce it, and make it easier to be retrieved later on. So you can do that in reading, you can do it in speech, you can do it in behaviors. It's the whole notion that if I want to change what I'm doing, I need to do things differently, and I need to focus. So the whole notion of meditating actually comes in. That's tremendous for increasing, focus.
Right.
Yeah, we always say that. But you also said it's making connections, right, for your memory. So like if somebody was having problems with reading of some kind, how would the connection part of it come in so they could make that work for themselves?
I'll start with a real quick example about in doing, and then I'll go to reading. Years ago, when I was teaching at the university, I was trying to emphasize a point with my students. And the whole notion was, what I was trying to explain to them is the importance of connections. That if you're going to remember something, or if you're going to learn something, the greater the connections you have with it, the more likely that behavior can be retrieved at a later time. So in the middle of my lecture, I had a bunch of ping pong balls, and I just picked them and I just threw them out at different people. And I said, okay, from this point on, 10 years from now, you're going to say to me, I remember when you did this nutty thing in class, but I now understand connection. Yeah. And it happened. And then someone actually, came up to me 15 years later and said, I remember.
That's so funny. You're actually talking about the thing that Dale Carnegie talked about, I don't know, 60 years ago in sales training. You have an associated connection with it to remember the person's face, the situation.
Exactly. And see, the neat thing about connections, I mean, think about a memory being laid out on a spider's web.
Okay.
If you make a movement in one part of the web, the spider can detect it no matter where it is. When you are laying down a memory, that memory is divided up. It's almost like a Picasso painting, where you look at the painting and you see, you may see a head, but it's not connected to the body. And you see, so they're all over the place. So think about what's what the brain is doing. The brain is saying, okay, there's a certain part of me that I will retain what I'm hearing. Certain part will look at color. Certain part will deal with odors. So, the more of these you have, the easier it is going to be to remember, what you occurred, because you hit one of the points and everything else gets put back together. It can be done at listening, reading, or doing.
I like that spider web idea. Think of it that way. You're using as many senses as you can. One will trigger the other.
Absolutely.
Woo!
So let's say somebody's reading a book about something they don't know anything about. And so what is your strategy there for making the connection with that so that they can?
So the first thing we want to do is you slow down the reading. And how do you slow it down? Well, you can do it by the rate. You can have them just read slower, and that works. But sometimes it's hard to do that. So I will put a piece of cardboard, like a cardboard index card, underneath each sentence as they're saying it, and make sure that that's being moved very slowly. So that can do it. When you read out loud, you're reading slower. You're speaking slower than you're reading. So that's going to reinforce it as well.
Yeah.
Is you reduce the amount of information that's coming in at any one time. So instead of just keep going on and on, what I will have, especially with people who are aphasic, who had strokes, is I will have them stop after 2 lines or 3 lines And then I'll ask them to tell me what's read, or I have them actually write it out and then say it. Okay, those are all my connections. Those are all my little spider points. And when I ask them to tell me about what they read, they have no problems at all. And the woman who had difficulty at the book club, she's right on now all the time because she's using these strategies.
Wow.
Amazing. Yeah.
People should learn this stuff now, not wait until they get older, because really a lot of people that have educational difficulties in learning could use your tricks and really benefit from them. So I do another question that has to do with memory, because in here, I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've wondered about my short-term memory and said, oh, my short-term memory sucks. I can't remember anything. And that, you say that enough times and you start to go, wow, that's not good. Like I have problems with short-term memory. So in here, you say short-term and long-term are tossed about as if everybody agrees on the meaning. Nothing can be further from the truth. Please tell me, what does that mean? How we process data?
Well, some people will say, okay, what is short-term memory? Short-term memory is anything that happens between now and 10 minutes from now. And other people will say, no, short-term memory has to do with where it's located in the brain. And other people, like me, will say, short-term memory is anything that happens up to the time you go to sleep.
Oh.
And when you sleep, it turns into long-term memory. So, I mean, I'm not saying that my definition is any better than anybody else's, but it's different. The important thing, I think, to understand with memory is that there are lots of things that could interfere with it. So if you're thinking about short-term memory, if I had a bad night's sleep, if I am concerned about, whether, my son will retain a certain position, if I'm not sure about what my health is going to be, I have all of this clutter.
Right.
And in the process, I've got to make dinner. So I'm making dinner and, and I put salt where I should have put sugar. Okay. Short-term memory thing. Well, is that really a problem of memory, or is it a problem of clutter? And we can look at a lot of things in memory as that. Problems in memory seem to be the result of other variables. And a lot of those variables we can correct, we can change.
You know what I hear you saying is that, so for example, how people will get up and go into a room and they're going to get something. And by the time they get there, they've forgotten, what the heck am I doing here? And they stand there going, what am I doing in this room? So you're saying, from what I'm hearing, is not that you forgot, but you had so much damn clutter from the moment that you walked from where you are to where you're going. You had so many damn thoughts that you just like lost track of where you were.
Now, what you just described is called sequential memory.
Okay.
And that's a problem that I have. I mean, I've got memory problems in all categories, but you're looking at different kinds of memory. You have something called sensory memory, which is, let's say you observe someone who is dressed weirdly, very strangely, and he goes around the corner. Well, for a moment, that image is still there. He's not there, but the image is there. So that's sensory memory. Following sensory is short-term memory. So you're talking to someone next to you, go, wow, did you see the guy over there? And then you talk about that. And then sequential memory is anything that requires steps, a bunch of different steps. So for me, when I noticed I was having memory problems, I'd be sitting at my computer and I'm writing. And I thought, okay, I want to get a cup of coffee. So by the time I went up to the kitchen, I had no idea why I was there. Now, I realized that the reason I didn't realize is my brain was still
writing.
Yeah. So, it didn't mean I was getting older. It didn't mean that I was getting more demented. It just meant that I allowed too much clutter to interfere with what I wanted to do.
Yeah. Well, how do you know then, if these so-called senior moments are really a sign of someone who may have a real cognitive issue?
And that's a great question. And so I'm going to give you my best theoretical answer, because again, I don't have a brain next to me that I can peel back and look at and find out. But I think that there's different things to look at. First is the type of senior moment people have. There's like 8 different types of senior moments. I won't go through all of them, but start at the very most common, forgetting names. And so you forget names, you can forget objects, so you go on. And then the last one is disorientation, where you're somewhere and you don't know where you are, or you don't know how to get back to a certain place. Yeah. So if you look at that and you go, okay, if someone is disoriented, good chance that might be in the early signs of dementia. It may not, but it might. So, but what you need to do, though, is you need to think about different parts of that. What's the context of that senior moment? Was everything going on just calmly and this weird thing happened, or are there enough precursors that you could explain that? What is the number, the amount of these things? I mean, if you get disoriented driving to your favorite supermarket once, is that the same as having that same issue 6 times in 2 months? Well, so you look at the number of times, and then you also look at the severity. And the one example that you keep seeing on TV is, the woman puts her keys in the refrigerator as a sign of dementia. Well, probably, but it's like there is no absolute, criteria for any one of these be a sign of dementia. But what it can do, even though we don't know, we can operate as if it is an indication of dementia. And the reason you want to do that is you want to prepare. The statistics on developing Alzheimer's or other forms of dementia are frightening. When you get over the age of 65 or 70, I think it's NIH, I think, has like 30% of us will develop some form of dementia. So if I know that might be in the cards, even though it's a small chance, wouldn't I want to now do something here that would prepare me for that?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's why you really want
to minimize it as best you can, with by getting more focus.
Absolutely.
Yeah, which is what your book is all about. So that brings me to a kind of an exciting area in your book that really made me think, and that is about creativity. You're a writer. That's all about being creative. So how does our brain work differently or not as we age? Is the creative process the same? Does it work the same way? Can we stimulate it the same way, get it to be creative? Is it all happening the same kind of way? Like, I think about that a lot, like in terms of, if I don't write now, it's not going to happen, but then again, when I write, it's kind of like I go away and it just gets written. So
like you, that to me is one of the most exciting findings I had. It was the notion of creativity. And there's a reference in the book, and I do not remember it, but it was 2 people who wrote an article on the importance of cognitive effort. And oh no, I take that back. It was another article on creativity. And they asked, what is involved in creativity? And so I think there was about 5 or 6. If you have it there, that's great.
Providing multiple answers based on the available information, constant analysis of what is being created, willingness to redraft and start over again, ability to engage in complex and creative problem-solving activities, ability to combine convergent and divergent thinking, and willingness to ask what-if questions. Ta-da!
and I read that and I thought, okay, but that's exactly the same things that go on in cognitive work. Every one of those things apply. And then I started looking at some of the research they've been doing on the regeneration of neurons in people with dementia. And they found that when they did creative work, and they define creativity very widely. These people actually develop new neurons, which
Wow.
blew me away.
Wow.
Okay.
Wow.
And so not only that, but also different pathways, of connecting neurons. So what that said to me was, if this can occur in people who already are on a dementia path, what will it do to those of us who I think we still are doing okay?
We still got
Yeah.
this.
That's
I-
amazing.
So I mean, I think that that's really critical in terms of preventing senior moments. You keep your brain active,
Yes.
and the neat thing about it, I think, about both creativity and cognitive work, is the benefits to the brain have nothing to do with the outcome.
Hmm.
To give you an idea, I've been working on a novel now for 10 years.
Yeah.
The same one has gone through 8 or 10 revisions,
I get
but
it.
I feel good when I'm working on it, and I don't know if it'll ever be published, and it doesn't make a difference.
Right.
The same thing is true with other kinds of creative activities. So if you want to stay young and you want to prevent those those incidences of senior moments,
Yeah.
get out a puzzle.
Yeah.
Look at a crossword, puzzle there, a little anything like that. So the idea is, as long as those criteria that you describe are involved in that activity, you're going to be helping your brain.
That's really interesting, because this is where not just our perceptions, but our judgments of ourselves and others, when we get into that fear territory, comes into play, in my opinion, because you're saying keep your mind busy doing something, be on purpose about something, whether it's you're doing puzzles, you're doing math formulas. I know a woman who's 83, she's still a public accountant, because she says, I do it because the numbers keep my brain going, like, okay, I get it. But same thing with writing, right? You could be in fantasy world. It's not real. You're making up real worlds. You're world creating. You're doing all kinds of crazy stuff. It's not real, but you're keeping your mind busy and engaged, and that's good for you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, that's why I wanted to bring up my mother-in-law is 97 years old. Her mind is as good as a younger person. She drives. She was my father-in-law he was a builder, and a very complex business, and she was the bookkeeper, and he passed away, gosh, 20 years ago, but she continues to keep her book. She doesn't really have a business anymore, but she keeps this ledger. It's a very complex ledger. And I just have to wonder if that isn't hard. I mean, she won't use Excel. She does it all longhand, because she says she rather use her brain. She trusts her brain more than a computer. And do you think that has something to do with the fact that she's mentally so sharp at 97?
I would like to think so. If
Hmm.
for no other reason, then I hope to be that sharp at 97 as
I mean,
well.
it's absolutely amazing. I mean, she astounds the doctors, I mean,
I think that there could be so many just incredible research projects that could be done by looking at the brains of people who, let's say, at the same age, those who had a history of being creative or involved in cognitive works, and those that sat on a couch and watched reruns of Law and Order.
yeah, yeah.
What's going on in these brains?
Yeah.
That's so interesting. Well, you've given us so much I don't know, food for thought. But here's the thing: what stands in the way for a lot of people, I already mentioned fear, but for a lot of people, it's the ability to change. The desire to change is one thing. Once you get them to that place, you motivate them. I hope you're motivated, listeners, by now, just by hearing in the last 40 minutes, because I mean, I sure am. You talk about this specifically in your book. You talk about the 3 steps that make change easier. Do you want to talk about those? And I can read them if you need them.
Absolutely. Most people, I mean, people have different approaches to change. At the very extreme, are those who think about using the British upper lip. So you endure, and whatever it is, you just endure. And they have a lot of failures. You have other people who believe all it takes to change is motivation. And what happens there is the person who fails at changing blames himself rather than the guru, who never provided anything other than some mystical or spiritual idea of how to change it. What I found, because I mean, in all of my therapy, because I've been doing speech language communication therapy for 30 years.
Wow.
One of the principles that I've always used was, if my client has trouble, it's not his fault. I've just failed. I haven't provided her with what she needs in order to move from one step to the next. And there's a whole sequence of training that can be done and should be done. I mean, anybody who is involved in changing behavior should understand how you do that, how you move very gradually. So for me, change should be almost as easy as not moving at all. So, if you develop that into your change program, you're going to have a client or a friend or a partner who continually succeeds. What's better than success for moving someone through? What gets someone to stop if they fail immediately? So yeah, we're on the same page.
Yeah. Set small goals and take steps toward them. That's all you got to do. Baby steps. Like, what's that? Bob. How about Bob? What about Bob? Baby steps every dang day to get there, right?
Or infant steps, even better.
Even better. Infant steps. I like that. Okay, your turn, Chris.
Well, I was just thinking about a time a number of years ago. I had always been told by people, "Oh, don't sing, don't, whatever you do, you can't do this." And it was just always said to me. And I decided at a certain point I wanted to learn to sing. And someone very important to me said, you just never learned is the problem. So anyway, Kathy actually recommended a singing teacher to me. And this was like the most fun thing I did in my life. I was terrified, and my first lesson, he said, there's nothing mysterious about singing. It's two things. It's the muscles memorizing the position and confidence. And he said, you don't have any confidence. He said, but we'll get the muscles to memorize the positions, and then you'll have plenty of confidence to do this. And it was awesome. I mean, it was one of the most fun things I did, because what he did in that first session was he set me up to do it. He helped me drop that paradigm I had and the fear, and he said, I love working with people like you because you're willing to learn. He said, when the professionals come in, it's much harder for me because they think they know it all and they don't, and so it was an interesting experience. I think it was, I just found it extremely opening experience. And is that the kind of thing that you're talking about here?
Exactly. I play the Japanese flute called the shakuhachi. And it's a strange instrument, and people have not only have problems saying it but actually playing it. But in San Francisco, one of the best performers in the world lives here, and he also gives lessons. So I have been taking lessons from someone prior to that, and I thought, wow, I can get a lesson from the greatest living shakuhachi player. And I had my first lesson, and I never went back. As great of a performer as he was, he didn't know how to teach.
Teacher. He wasn't a teacher.
Yeah, that's everything.
Yeah, there's a difference. Yeah.
So learning. It requires two things. It requires the student who is willing to listen, and it requires the teacher who understands how to teach.
Yeah.
And that's a lifelong process. Something, as I'm listening to you both talk, we all share that. Chris is a teacher. She's been teaching yoga for 40 something years. I'm now a coach. You're doing your communicating your whole life. And we know it's our duty, it's our responsibility to communicate. What happens on the other end of that is our responsibility. And I know I have worked so hard in my life to be a good communicator. That's one of my, main driving forces, is to, always be understanding, how is that message landing over there? Like what's going on over there? And it's shocking to me when I see people that don't realize that or don't live like that. I'm like, have you no empathy? Oh gosh, where can we go from here? Do you have more questions? I kind of have one, but
Well, what do you do personally, just to keep your mind sharp? Is there any, something in particular you would like to, advice you'd like to give our listeners?
Yeah, I think that organization is important in your life, both internal and external organization. So I try to keep my mind organized, and I do that, through exercise and through meditation. I realize the limitations that I have because I'm getting older, but they're not ones that are debilitating.
Right.
I've learned to accept a lot of differences between what I can do now and what I did 10 years ago. I've been able to adjust, and when I can't quite adjust, then I'll adapt. So I think adaptation is probably one of the most important principles of aging, of successful, joyful aging, is learning how to adapt and modify goals.
Wow. And now you say it like that, it reminds me of one of the other things that I read in your book, and that's about attitudes and how they need adjustment, right? Because that's everything. You can't get past a bad attitude. So what can you give our listeners that would help them not be grouchy, help them get out of a negative state, help them get out of an unmotivated place, or they're stuck in a particular mindset?
I'm not sure I can tell them how to get out of being grouchy. If I could do that, I would have used it myself.
Grouchy to me.
I think in terms of attitude and senior moments, is a willingness to be open to something that you're doing might not be appropriate, but is still correctable.
Yeah.
And understanding that what some of the issues you're having now might be predictive of what you will experience in the future. And whether or not it is, if you prepare for it now, you'll be much happier later.
Oh, that's great advice. Instead of looking away and ignoring it and letting everybody else around you deal with it.
Yeah.
You may be able to stave some of it off, So just I want to give you a chance to talk a little bit about your book. If you haven't, listeners, heard something by now that you can take away and use, you've been sleeping. But if you want to give them idea of that when your book is coming out, right? Is it out yet?
It's coming out in October. I'm not sure, right? But the title is Preventing Senior Moments: How to Stay Sharp into your 90s and beyond.
Love it.
You can get it at any of the online booksellers. Hopefully it'll be available in independent bookstores, those that are still around.
Right.
And there's a lot of the genesis of the book came from many of the articles that I've written, and all of those articles, there's probably over 200, are available on my website for free. You can just download them. And that website is Stan Goldberg Writer, WRITER.com.
Great. We don't worry about all those links, listeners. I'll put those all in the show notes so you can get to them. And are you on social media at all?
Yes. I'm on Facebook and LinkedIn and all of those.
Awesome.
If I don't have all those, I'll make sure I connect with you and get all those so we can put them in the show notes and people can get a hold of you. Because honestly, I was very uplifted by reading as much as I could before we had this talk today. I felt more hopeful and less afraid about what's to come in the future. So I hope that's what happens for our listeners as well. Thank you so much for being with us.
It's been a very, very uplifting talk. So
It
Thank you
is.
for having me.
much.
Yeah, so much fun. Bye, everyone.
Bye.